So today I wanted to start by telling you a story. A story about a boy named Jack. And Jack is a normal boy, he's 11, he goes to school, gets to read lots of text all the time in a variety of languages, but he finds the text that he's reading very difficult to understand. And when he goes home, there's his mom trying to help him, but again, it's difficult. Roll on 10 years, and Jack is now 21. He's working in an office, he has to read lots of reports, and guess what? He's still finding it quite difficult to understand the text in front of his eyes. What's the issue here? Maybe it will come quite shocking to you that there's actually research that shows that 75% of us, we read a piece of text, we do a comprehension test, and 75% of us fail that test in one way or another. So readers are struggling, whether they're at school, whether they're young students, whether they're at work. Maybe they're wonderful translators, like many of you guys, that you read a lot of text. And this is becoming a little bit too overwhelming. Add this to the fact, and again, this is research data, 20% of all humanity has some form of learning disability. 20%, 1 in 5. 1 in 5 of us. If there's 40 here, 1 in 5 of us, 8 have some form of learning disability, whether you're diagnosed or not. And that is also one of the wonderful issues. So we started i-Smart. We started i-Smart about 5 years ago. It used to be a European project, so kudos and thanks to the Commission. And then about a year ago, we had such great results that we took it to market. What do? We are an app that you can use on your mobile or on your tablets, ideally on your tablets, that helps you to personalize what you're reading in a better way than Kindle, for example, would do. So you can actually change the colors with which you read, the fonts, the spacing, and most importantly, you can use text-to-speech to listen to a word that you might not know how to say, a sentence, or a whole paragraph. And then if you want to write, you can use the reverse. You can use speech to text. So you talk, i-Smart writes for you. We help you focus one line at a time. A lot of the time, our eyes, especially when we're reading of a tablet, of a mobile, they tend to run away with us. Actually, focusing one line at a time, maybe many of us as kids used to use a real ruler, you know, and on the book, you read line by line. That was actually a great idea, and we have reused that digitally in our app. And we help you visualize. 65% of people tend to be more visual learners. So whilst you are reading a text, you can actually split the screen, tap on the important concepts, and build a mind map as you go along. And guess what? We're multilingual. But all of those languages, except Maltese, are very big languages that do not have the we don't have enough data problem like you've heard already this morning. So Maltese is there as an interface to the app. Yes, you can already upload ebooks in Maltese and manipulate them, but the text-to-speech and speech-to-text bits are missing. Why? Because small languages, and here I put in not just Maltese, but many of the other small languages around Europe, have very little reference materials. You've heard this already, very little data. There is no Google support for text-to-speech and speech-to-text. So even though Google Translate does work from English to Maltese and vice versa, but actually you cannot hear it in Maltese, and you cannot talk to Maltese in Maltese and actually get something decent out of it. And it's a small market. You've heard the numbers this morning from Tony Sant. Very few hundreds of thousands there. However, as i-Smart, we think we can make a difference. First and foremost, we've already started academic collaboration, and here I think already we've already been working also with the University of Malta Linguistics Department, but we're also working with University of Palermo, different universities in Finland, with the language specialists. We're piloting it in schools. Here in Valletta, we'll be doing pilots, for example, with St. Albert the Great. A little bit of a small gripe that I have is that we have not yet managed to pilot it in a government school. So hint, hint, when you see the minister later on. But we believe we're a unique selling point. If we target the small languages around Europe, then it's not any longer a small market. Because there are hundreds of small languages around Europe and thousands around the world, which are at risk of disappearing. So basically, yes, we have this difficult part with Maltese, but we believe that once we crack this, there's hopefully replicability for other markets and other languages. I've already mentioned that we have some great competition out there, but as you can see, we do have a variety of features, more than them. And we started to get recognized. So i-Smart is not just a Maltese company, i-Smart is a Finnish company as well. We are part of the Education Finland group, we are part of the Exedu Accelerator in Helsinki. We actually get more recognition there than here, but that's another story. Although we did win the Malta Innovation Summit Award this year, so I cannot grumble too much. In the US, we are finalists for the EdTech Innovation Startup Contest this year. United Nations, we are the national nominee for the Educational World Summit Awards. And in London, we're part of the Social Stock Exchange. What's our business model? Our app is for free. So the students get it for free. How do we make money? Well, we collaborate with book publishers and other content providers that want to make their content available through i-Smart. They are the guys that eventually foot the bills. But then, in the future, we hope to be able, from all the data that we'll be generating, from all those kids reading all those books, to generate some interesting AI-based big data reports and then resell them also to schools, publishers, experts for detection and assistance. So for example, we tested i-Smart in Turkey. In Turkey, there is no detection of dyslexia because it is seen as a bad thing. So if a teacher tells your parent, you know, you should get your child checked for dyslexia, for them it's like a black mark in the family, so they don't do it. So the child ends up not being diagnosed, not having the support they need, just because of that. The good thing about i-Smart is that we give a tablet and the software to every child in the room. So everyone gets it, not just the special kids. This is our team. In Malta, we are based in nhar. So if you want to come visit us, please do. Maybe some of you might know Annalise, who's like me, always running around talking about i-Smart. We're quite international. We have Italians, Australians, Brits, and a couple of Maltese, of course. We work with expert advisors, with psychologists. We didn't invent this on our own. We worked with academia in order to get to where we are today. Our roadmap is the following. Next year, we want to make alliance with publishers. Here in Malta, I'm very happy to say there's already some interest as well from Maltese book publishers. which would be great, because then we get the kids to read in Maltese. And later on, we focus more on analytics improvement, expanding globally. We are looking for partners. Maybe the previous people just said, we need money. I'm telling you exactly how much we need. Why? Because you never know who has contacts in a room, so we're starting a funding round as from next week in Finland, and that's my little pitch deck. But where I really think that you people can help me is on the other side, in the looking for expertise. People who share our values. And I believe here there's many of you who share our values, who can understand what we are doing. We are a social enterprise. We don't just want to become rich. We want to become rich whilst helping society. So, do you remember Jack? Now, imagine if Jack had had iSmart at school when he started his journey. Wouldn't his life have been a better place? Contact me later if you want to help us with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angel. A very interesting insight into part of the industry connected with language. The next interesting presentation is from Mea Juice, from the University of Malta. We have a very interesting mix of industry and academia too, because there is an engineering element. I got to know about this project from a very fortuitous Google alert about translation, and there was an article about AAC, which May will talk about, which is a technology for non-verbal Maltese-speaking individuals. It was published on Think magazine, so thanks to data and internet, I got to know about this project, and we have invited May to give her speech. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So as he said, as Mark said, my name is Mea Juice. I'm a speech and language therapist working with ACTU, Access to Communication and Technology Unit. We are an assistive technology unit. You may not know about us because we're very small and we're based in the Ministry of Education. This project was a collaboration between myself as co-supervisor with Dr. Owen Assa. So we were both supervisors of our student, Sylvan Abela. But before I go into that actual project, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do as a unit. So Access to Communication Technology Unit, it is an assistive technology unit. We are a team of speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, and we have some educational staff as well. We assess children who are in school services for assistive technology to support their access to the curriculum. This includes access to software for writing and literacy. So Angel, wherever you are, that was really interesting because we don't know about iSmart. We also, and this is the big thing, we make a lot of recommendations for AAC, augmentative and alternative communication. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Our clients are very diverse with an extensive range of needs. So we will be talking about students who have physical disabilities, students who have autism. Majority of them are Maltese dominant, and so this is a big, big issue for us. Not in a negative way, in terms of what we can provide as a service. The range of products for us to choose from is limited because if they want Maltese, we have to look and see what we can do there. Our solution most often is to adapt an English language product for the Maltese language, and that leads us into all kinds of problems. I want to talk about AAC because that's the focus of this presentation and of the project. What is it? Because I'm assuming that some of you probably don't know or maybe never heard about it before. So it's augmentative and alternative communication. It's an area of research, clinical and educational practice, and it's the use of equipment and interventions to augment or support an individual's communication. And earlier on, Dr. Gutt mentioned Mari Alexander and her dictionary of signing, and in fact, we would consider signing to be an unaided AAC system. We say unaided because it doesn't use anything external to the body, and we're using the body to communicate or to supplement our communication. AAC can include both spoken and written communication, and in many countries the provision of assistive technology to support communication has become legislated for, and recently Scotland announced that the government will fund all AAC systems for individuals who need them. in England as well. For many individuals, this is the main means for them to be able to participate in society. So this is a right. It's crucial for some individuals in terms of being able to get into work, education. Today, though, we're interested more in aided AAC. So this is where we start to introduce other things outside of the body. Because for some individuals, the use of the body is not the way forward. It's just not going to happen as a main system. And then here we have low-tech systems, which are usually paper-based, and high-tech systems. Now, when it comes to high-tech systems, we're talking about electronic devices which will provide speech output or voice output of some kind. And we're interested in the high-tech AAC systems, right? These are some pictures of some that exist on the market right now. We're interested in them probably more so than the other systems because these are the ones that can provide a real fully functioning language system, in brackets, in English. When it comes to a component of a high-tech AAC system, we need to think about what we're going to use. So first we start with the hardware. So we're going to have either something designed for this purpose. So this would be a dedicated AAC device, and the picture at the bottom, the Dynavox one, that would be a dedicated AAC device. It was built purposely for this purpose, to be used for communication. Or nowadays we're starting to use mainstream tablet technology, like tablets, mobiles as well. And this is maybe in the last 10 years. They are cheaper, they are portable, so for some people this will be the solution, but not for everyone. The second part of the system that we want to think about is how are we going to represent the vocabulary? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the words. What are they going to look like? And often enough, we use symbols. We use symbols because they're faster. We don't want somebody to have to think too much about how to find a word, so we use symbols. We may also be using keyboards, so spelling. Someone might be using spelling plus prediction, or there might be full written words written as well. The third thing is the voice output. And you've heard it twice already, and I'm going to say it again. We don't have the text-to-speech. That's a big issue for us, for Maltese. We do have it, though. Or, because I would be wrong in saying we don't have it, but I would say right now, no readily available text-to-speech engine for the Maltese language that functions with AAC software or apps on any platform. So ACTU were partners in the original text-to-speech project. We were. We told them it wasn't working with the one piece of software that we needed for communication purposes, and they didn't fix it. And given that we're now talking about systems that might be Windows-based or Android or iOS, actually we don't have a system in Maltese at all. Our current options, so what do we do? How do we deal with this as a team? We take an English-based system and we record over the English words with Maltese words. Of course, that's only possible if the software or the app allows the recording. So the one software that works on Windows for AAC that should run with text-to-speech engine, and they are actually willing to work with us on this. Right now we can record on there. There are also 300 AAC apps on the Apple Store, but less than 5 allow recording because the rest of them are running on text-to-speech. There's one Windows-based software. Recording every word is extremely time-consuming. And the Maltese language is different to English. The reality is that AAC apps are designed, and there is research specifically in the area of how we organize vocabulary on the screen. This is where my PhD research is in right now. And Maltese is not the same as English. We can't say we're going to just take the organization of English and translate it to Maltese. It actually doesn't really work that well. The upshot of all this is that we can never achieve a fully functioning AAC system in the Maltese language. And actually, this is a terrible thing, but I'm going to say that we probably end up, with our recording, limiting people to 2 to 3 year level in terms of their language. So we have lots of conversations with families about whether they would like to go for English as their main language, especially if we see potential in the clients that we're dealing with, because we don't want it to be that the system itself constrains the child from moving forward in life, because that's what would happen. So most AAC users in Malta are actually communicating through the English language. And this might be, it is weird, because some of these are living in families where Maltese is spoken as the main language on a daily basis. Then you might be saying to yourself, well, how many individuals actually need AAC? Yeah, it's a small market. But you know what? There are lots of people. We're talking, in Malta, we don't currently have any figures on how many people need AAC systems or are dependent on them. In the UK, about 4% was the last, but again, there are issues there with knowing the exact number. I would say to you that this is growing hugely because we have a lot of autistic individuals being referred to us now that maybe 5, 10 years ago they weren't seen as candidates for these systems. So I would say it's on the rise. We can't deal with the number of referrals that we have. And they have a right to communicate in the Maltese language if they want to. That's how we would see it. We also have another growing problem, which is that our team is set up for children because it's based in education, and now we have them all growing into adulthood, wanting to use these systems as well. And we have a whole bunch of adults our age who know how to use tablet technology now, and if anything happened, you'd be wanting that system to support your communication. So in comes this little project. Really was a result of me saying to somebody at the Faculty of Human Communication, that's where I also provide lectures, you know, we really need an app for Maltese for AAC purposes. And she put me in touch with Dr. Owen Assa at the Faculty of ICT. So this was a collaboration between us all. We supervised Sylvan. We didn't think anyone would choose this as a title because it's not an easy one, but he chose this. So he was a student, and this was his undergraduate project. His brief was to design an AAC app for Maltese speakers, and he chose to design it for young children who are Maltese speakers. Basically, what happens here is you tap those images on the screen and voice is emitted. He chose to run this on an Android platform because he said that most people in Malta, 70% or so, were preferring to use Androids over iOS systems. And he did lots of great things. We were quite impressed for an undergraduate project. He did a great job. He put in a dictionary that we could edit. We can add vocabulary, we can remove it. He identified that we needed to be able to disable app features because sometimes kids get in there and do all kinds of things. He also realized that we need data logging. We need to know how things are being used. And he created a profile that we could back up into the iCloud because, believe me, kids delete things. The app can be locked, so it's the only app available for use to that child if we want it that way. And believe me, with autistic kids, we do want it that way because they'll go into YouTube and watch other things. Our favorite feature of the app that he came up with was that he did manage to put in some prediction in Maltese. So this is the first time ever for us that we actually had something with prediction because most often when we record on the English apps, the app won't recognize what this word means, so it can't predict. They don't predict. But this one did. So what he did was he put in a list of probable words that will be generated each time the user selects a word. So over here we've got It-tieni, and it's predicted, my favorite thing there, pastids, right? So it knew that it's a food item. So this was the first app that we got that's actually designed with some level of prediction to make communication faster. Voice output. Big question mark. What did Sylvain do? He took his girlfriend off to the University of Malta radio station and they recorded themselves. Very nice, clear voices, but obviously the app is limited because he only has a very small vocabulary in there. He did look at what you mentioned earlier, the lexicon, the corpus, no, the words that are available, but there were too many words for children, so he then had to come up and decide which words to use for a child. So that's another area of research that I'm currently involved with Dr. Daniela Gutt at the Faculty of Human Communication. So at this point in time, we still don't know how kids really develop their vocabulary and what are the best words to have for them in Maltese, and we're relying on English words. So, what are our challenges, right? We need a Maltese voice, and we would prefer it to be synthesized for the reason that recordings take up a lot of memory and they slow down our apps and our software. And because the verbs in Maltese language, with the 420 or so variations, it's just too much. We have tried to record, but what happens is that we need so many variations of the verb that it slows things down, and then also some of our users can't read. So how do we represent all these different variations of verbs? So we need something that's designed for Maltese from the outset. what we are doing, I suppose, is lack of Maltese voice means that we're choosing to use English language for AAC systems, even though they are predominantly Maltese speaking. So that for us is something we would love to improve. I will go back to that EU-funded text-to-speech project from before that you mentioned, that is now not working. I have put together FITA. FITA is currently responsible for it with the Faculty of ICT, and they are looking at seeing if they can resurrect it, because we really want that to work. Okay, and we really need it for assistive technology purposes. Okay, all right, so that's me. Thank you.
May, I'm sorry. I'll use my natural voice. Thank you very much, May. Hello. Thank you very much, May. Excuse the audio issue. A very enlightening presentation regarding the challenges that are being faced in this domain. And now for further doom and gloom, there's my friend Mark De Bono from the content provider Sistemato. His title is in Maltese. It is Bil-Malti ħadd ma jaqra, which means nobody reads in Maltese. And these are his suspicions from 8 years of copywriting. And this is one of the presentations that I've been looking forward to. He will then be followed by Dr. Alex Piteri-Gingell from the translation company Transcripta, who will be also talking about the challenges of localization in Maltese. So here we have two presentations which... yes, please. So we'll have two presentations which will further describe challenges which are also on the business level. So while we wait for Mark to get his pen drive. These are two brief testimonials which will be preceding Dr. Theresa Lynn's keynote speech for this session. Okay.
Right. Good morning, everyone. So as Mark said, my name is also Mark. And this is basically lessons and suspicions that I have from 8 years of providing digital content to industry, essentially. So we have nothing to do with academia, although I've been fascinated by what you said so far. But we are a business, so we are in the content provision business, essentially. Don't let the cheery colors and font kind of fool you. This won't be very pretty, I'm afraid. So my name is Mark, as I said, I'm 31 years old. I'm the son of 2 teachers, so my childhood was enviable. I was never right. All my teachers were always right. I'm from a Maltese-speaking family, and they are obsessed with the Maltese languages. My parents, my uncles, grandparents, etc., etc. I'm the founder of a digital marketing agency called Sistemato. We are 8 years young, and among other services, one of our main lines is that we sell content, the written word, to our clients. Hundreds of thousands of words of content every year. So all of this content is not machine written. We have a team of writers, and they write in a variety of languages, English being the dominant one. For example, we had an order this year. This was the largest single order we received for a month, which was 130,000 words, split between English, Swedish, and Finnish. So that's quite a nice number. I like seeing that, and more than that, I like seeing the invoice that we submit to the client. And like I said, we're not academic, so this is by no means a scientific kind of litmus test of any sort. But for a long time, we were kind of alone in the content provision sphere locally. So as a result of that, we got a lot of very interesting and extremely varied work. And we were, and we still are, in the enviable position of being able to spot trends in content writing. So if someone asks me about how you write a casino review, which is boring to all of you, I know that trends in casino review writing have changed drastically in the past 8 years. So I can also kind of spot where the trends are going for all other kinds of content writing. However, we expected a big surge in Maltese language content, which we never got. At least, we never got. Others may have got this kind of boom in orders in the Maltese language, but we never really got that. In fact, our word count in Maltese, our output in Maltese, simply pales in comparison to our output in English. My head of content, David, who helped me put this slide deck together, basically told me that it's 0%. We assign and deliver more content in English each week than we've written in Maltese in total over the past 5 years. So that makes for a sobering kind of story. Because, well, I like my language, I love my language, and I believe that there is scope for digital prospects for Maltese, but it seems that the output simply isn't there, the market simply isn't there. So yeah, shock horror, right? So we don't get much work in Maltese, I've established that, but why? I suspect, and although I may be biased, I may be wrong here, but I suspect that there is not that much work going around of this kind. So basically there is not much digital related work in Maltese, commercially speaking, that is not academic. Or maybe I'm wrong and bitter, you can tell me. So of the content that we did write in the past 8 years, what was it that we wrote in Maltese? And we came with kind of a breakdown. In the vast majority of cases, clients requested Maltese content from us as a complement to original drafts in English, or else as a translation of existing content in English. Largely due to legal requirements, or just because they felt it would be nice to have, or whatever it was. By and large, content writing in Maltese was requested at the last minute because of legal requirements, or else as an afterthought, or most often, never even considered. And our clients, who were the clients that actually asked us for content in Maltese? So we had some translation agencies, often ones based overseas with no contacts locally, so they basically Google us. So they Google content writers Malta or Maltese content writers, yada yada, and they have a piece of text that they need translated or else they need revised. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm keeping translation and revision together, basically, because they go hand in hand for us. We had an importer and reseller of pharmaceuticals that needed some text in Maltese. We had a local telecoms provider, and by the time we were done with this content, it was cringeworthy. An independent video game developer also wanted some text in Maltese, and a candidate for a local council election. We have our own ideas of whom we could be writing content in Maltese for, but that doesn't, okay, I'm coming to that actually. What was the actual Maltese content that we got requests for, so down to the specific piece of content. So the types of content included product descriptions, menus for restaurants, flyers, speeches, short personal biographies, and press releases. And even in press releases, where you would expect you would have a lot of press releases in Maltese, we don't. We write so many more press releases in English than we do in Maltese. We submit press releases in English to Maltese-speaking media houses just because the client doesn't want to pay anything extra for Maltese. It's just that way. And what was this content's intended purpose or use? The majority of the content we wrote in Maltese was destined for print material only, to be only circulated locally, which is a stab in my heart because we're a digital agency, so writing for print is anathema to me, but hey, pay some bills, so we do it. Here's where I come back to what we could have done. We do have ideas about which of our clients we would like to write a Maltese for, but it doesn't happen. And these included an in-flight magazine. There's 2 online blogging sites, one current and one is defunct, several local restaurants, hotels, clubs and hospitality venues, notaries publics, accountants and other professionals that deal largely with a Maltese-speaking clientele. So these are people that have an account with us, so to speak. They know our billing details, we know theirs, they give us work regularly and so on. And we'd love the opportunity to write some content in Maltese for them. But sadly, it's never materialized. We've suggested it sometimes and other times even neglected to suggest it because we know that the answer is going to be no. So, we used to have more content requests in Maltese prior to 2016. Why? Again, this is not scientific, it's just a suspicion I have. But the explosion in popularity of social media, especially after the rise of English language news media companies in Malta on Facebook, which does not truly predate 2015 and 2016, they were not that influential before that point, appears to coincide with the beginning of a marked decline in requests for Maltese content, at least from us. Now I know that correlation is not causation. As you can see, the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool correlated with films that Nicolas Cage appears in. The 2 data sources are completely separate. They appear to be tied, they are not. So I say that with a big caveat. Second, the game is rigged. Economically speaking, Maltese simply cannot compete in English. If you want a bigger market, you go for English. If you want to supply, English is far, far bigger than Maltese. We understand this. So in a globalized context, English offers our clients and ourselves simply too much convenience and opportunity to its users, whether they are business or individuals. Number 3, the irony of it, this is just an observation. So in a historical twist that I find quite ironic, the foreign languages, predominantly English, have become the language of the workplace, basically. So I've been working in the digital realm now for 10 or 11 years. I've never used Maltese. Even when I was working for a government agency, I've never used Maltese there. It was still an afterthought there. It's English all the way. English is the language of the working world, especially in the digital sphere. And the native tongue Maltese is being most employed profitably in the arts, political and legal discourse, and I apologize for forgetting academia over here. Number 4, tell me where it hurts. So this is a personal pain point, kind of, for me. So in my view, being Maltese is not just the language, although it obviously plays a significant part of our identity. But by missing out on Maltese in our digital experiences, are these experiences themselves a little bit less Maltese tinged, shall we say? It's a highly romantic notion, but it's something that I feel. And does this chip away at our identity as Maltese, day by day, with each minute of usage? And God knows we have many minutes of usage. And number 5, today English exerts an influence like never before on Maltese speakers, because there are simply more influences. 200 years ago, it was the language of the colonizers, the language of the law, the language of the elites, and so on. Nowadays, English is just everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And most technological and digital products launch and gather huge global audiences in English first, because that is their primary market. And only after they become a success do they become made available in Maltese and other languages. If you take Facebook, if you take Google, Maltese was made available on those platforms many years after they became household names already. And it's still a vanity project of sorts. So if you have a friend that uses Facebook in Maltese, it's kind of a quirk that this person does and so on. It's interesting, but it's still not the main thing that people do. People use Facebook in English. So as the default language on computers and professional equipment, English is the default language at work. As the default language on mobile devices and apps, it is poised to become the default language of our life. But I have to take a good vibes only kind of moment from all the Instagram influencers, and I'm going to leave you with a little poem that David Mali, our head of content, wrote. And he basically wrote this: Forsi bil-Malti ħadd ma jaqra reklami digitali, imma fir-romanzi jew teledrammi, wirjiet jew liġijiet, min ħaddem il-sienna ikompli jagħtih ġieħ. Nizzikom ħajr. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, so my name is Alex Peter-Ginjal. I represent the company, translation company Transcripta, and my presentation will be dealing with the challenges of translation and localization in the Maltese language. Before further ado, I will start by introducing myself. So I'm known to friends and foes alike as being a man wearing many hats. I'm a lawyer by profession, musician and event organizer at night. But my bread and butter is translation services. Brief background on my experience with translation services: I started off as a freelance legal translator back in 2001 in connection with the translation of the EU acquis communautaire. Basically, this was translation of the whole body of EU laws into Maltese in preparation for Malta's accession to the EU in 2004. From there onwards, I went on to provide freelance translation service also to a variety of institutions, including the European Court of Justice, European Central Bank, European Investment Bank. And in 2004, I decided to set up a team of translators, so I co-founded the company Transcripta. Since then, the company has come in leaps and bounds. We now employ 20 employees. We work with more than 50 freelancers across more than 40 languages, including all European, most major Asian and Middle Eastern languages. However, to the day, Maltese represents 50% of what we do. We translate an average of 4,000 pages a month, which is equivalent to 1.2 million words per month. Now, where does this work come from? So what fuels the demand for Maltese translations? So the first and major category is what I would call, where it is compulsory or there's a legal requirement for text to be translated into Maltese. And the major driver here is the EU itself. So the various EU institutions, European Commission, European Parliament, Council, European Court of Justice, and European Central Bank, they are all obliged by the EU treaties to provide legal text, binding legal texts in Maltese. There was a period between 2004 and 2006 where there was a temporary derogation, so not all content was being translated. But since then, practically everything that is translated into other EU languages also translated into Maltese. There are various implications about this. Of course, in the European Court of Justice, Maltese is an equally valid language as any other language, so all EU texts have the same legal force. So because of this, there is a lot of content being translated into Maltese. But besides the institutions themselves, other EU legal requirements also require various industries to provide content in Maltese. One of them is the pharmaceutical industry, which is obliged to provide all their product specifications, dosage, side effects, well, all the nasty stuff you read inside your pharmaceuticals, that also must be provided in Maltese. And the same applies for various other industries who must provide, let's say, health and safety warnings, product manuals, etc., also Maltese. On a local level, of course, Maltese is, together with English, is the official language of Malta, and by default, it is the language used in the courts of Malta. So there's a lot of content which is either drafted originally or translated into Maltese, especially when we have, let's say, international litigation involving Maltese courts. So far we've looked at, content where we are translating to Maltese because we have to, because the law tells us that we have to. But then there is also another aspect, which is what my presentation will be mainly looking at, which is marketing. So this might probably sound a bit of contradictory to what Mark was previously saying, but in reality it's not really contradictory, it's probably the other side of the coin. Because Mark was mainly looking at probably the local perspective, as in, do we in Malta, do local businesses translate into Maltese or write in Maltese? And the answer seems to be a resounding no. Whereas global companies who want to globalize their products are increasingly translating their products and localizing their products into as many languages as possible, including Maltese. So in fact, multinationals increasingly understand that to penetrate local markets, you have to speak the local language. And this is encapsulated very well by the former German Chancellor Willy Brandt, who famously said that if I'm selling to you, I speak your language. If I am buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen. So if I am buying, you have to speak my language, whether I understand your language or not. So global friends want to be your best buddy. They will talk to you in your language, they will try and adapt to your local slang, your local dialect. Which leads us obviously to the elephant in the room. But don't all Maltese understand English anyway? Why do all these global companies need to invest all this effort and time and money to localize their products in Maltese? But I think this needs a bit of a nuanced analysis. So what are the myths? First of all, not all Maltese are truly bilingual. I'm sure the linguists amongst us will have much further to elaborate on the point. Of course, what is bilingual is also a subject for academic debate, but I think it's fair to say that not all Maltese are truly bilingual, and it's also fair to say that many Maltese have, maybe don't even understand English or have difficulties in expressing themselves or understanding English. But let's put that aside. There are also deep socio-cultural connotations. So even perfectly fluent bilingual Maltese speakers might attribute a certain attitude to being addressed in English rather than Maltese. It might be perceived as being snobbish, might be perceived as, the ramifications are quite deep. There's also a matter of national pride, and then there's also, of course, the social, emotional, psychological level. Da mentana, għax kellimni bil-Malti. So, small anecdote, German friend of mine recently moved to Malta. He's a banking supervisor, started banking in Malta. He said, Maltese are very polite, they were very respectful towards you, but somehow, not that engaging. So he decided to learn a few words in Maltese. So he'd go to the office, what's being, all right. All of a sudden, he was invited to all the dinner parties. Everyone's asking him out for drinks. He became the most popular man in the office. So a few words can go a long way. And that is exactly what global brands want to achieve. They want to be your best buddy. So in fact, all the big players in the scene, they have all localized their content in Maltese. Google is one of them. So you can, depending on your language settings or your choices, you can fully switch to the Maltese version of Google. The same applies to various Google apps, including those inked for the young ones. So many games on Google apps are also available in Maltese. And of course, if Google is on the game, Microsoft won't be lagging behind. So Microsoft Office is also fully available in Maltese and has been so available since 2010, I believe, Service Pack 2010. Now, this is where trouble starts in paradise. So, yes, these global players are all localizing their content in Maltese, but this can lead to a lot of controversy and a lot of mixed reactions. So, why do they write download, D-A-W-N-L-O-A-D, which is a pseudo localized version of download when they could have just written in English? Why write software, S-O-F-T-W-E-R, and not software in English? When on the same page we have words such as interface, drivers, patches, updates, suites, that have not yet been phonetically converted into Maltese. Of course, I don't have enough time to enter into the controversy, but it's important to point out that these reactions do exist. And in fact, it can also get quite, emotionally charged, these reactions. So the question, of course, is, who decides? Who decides how we should write Maltese, especially in a digital setting when we're talking about software localization? And ultimately, the buck stops with the Maltese Council, the Council for the Maltese Language, Kunsil Nazzjonali tal-Malti. And here I paste, and allow me to read a little bit. This is a reaction from a blog, a blogger called Ellen Bonnici, which I think encapsulates a little bit some reactions that do the rounds. So I quote, it says, Dear Kunsil Nazzjonali tal-Malti, the Maltese language is already at a disadvantage because of the limited number of people reading and writing it. Don't burden it further by stunts such as turning words of foreign origin into phonetically Maltese equivalents. Your role should be to sit in the background, monitoring how the language is developing and documenting that process. You should tell us every few years how the Maltese language has naturally evolved since the last time you checked. Now, you might agree, you might disagree. Of course, we could spend the whole day debating this and similar reactions. What I want to point out mainly is that there is a reaction to localized content. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be somewhere in between. So people are engaging with this content, whether it's, how they're engaging, of course, is a matter of another debate. So this leads us to the next point, alienation. So does the approach adopted to integrate or translate foreign loanwords lead the Maltese to feel alienated from their own language? One could arguably say that some do, and especially if the language they are reading in localized products does not reflect the day-to-day language that people are actually using in their daily life. Also with the code switching that is typical of Maltese people and the way people would expect to read text they can understand, this can lead to a form of alienation. Of course, this is quite a wide subject, so I obviously don't have the time to go into all this. But my observation would be that I would say that we need time for the dust to settle. In this last decade or so, I would say that there has been a whole. There have been so many new concepts, so many new words which have infiltrated, rightly or wrongly, Maltese. So it will take time until, let's say, people decide what language they feel comfortable with and what becomes the current language. I close by quoting Samuel Beckett, who says that the dust will not set in our time, and when it does, some great roaring machine will come and whirl it all sky high again. Grazie per l'attenzione.
Thank you very much, Mark and Delix. We also welcome the Education and Employment Minister, Mr. Everest Bartolo, and our keynote speech now, our first keynote speech, is by Dr. Theresa Lynn from It-tieni Center at the University of Dublin, and she will be talking to us about how technology is being used to support the Irish language.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me here today. It's a privilege to listen to all these talks, and I've learned so much more about the Maltese language than I would have prior to this, so it's been enlightening. So I am, like Albert, I am a computational linguist. I work in Dublin City University and in a research centre that's funded by Science Foundation Ireland. And my main focus of work is supporting the Irish language through technology. And that involves developing tools and resources similar to how Albert described the job. So the outline of the talk is I'll give a little bit of insight into Irish language for those who aren't familiar with it, and then a brief status on the language technology side of things. And then I'd like to touch on the role of social media. It's been touched on briefly by some speakers already, so I'd like to give our experience of that with Irish. So first up, Irish is a minority language in Ireland. Despite being the minority language, it's the national language and it's the first official language, so we do share the commonality across our countries. The 2016 census shows that there's a population of about 4.7 million. Out of them, 1.7 million people have professed to have the ability to speak Irish in the census. Now, this can be a bit misleading because Irish is a compulsory subject at school. So there's also a question, do you use Irish in your daily life outside of education, the education system? And 73,000 people professed to use it in their daily life as their first language. Now, on the map here, you'll see to the west of Ireland, the darker regions, they're known as the Gaeltacht regions. And people who live in the Gaeltacht primarily use Irish as their first language. Now, it doesn't mean to say that Irish is not dispersed throughout the country, and definitely in urban areas there's a more condensed use of Irish outside of the education system. I've also included the north of Ireland there because it is a minority, an official minority language in the north of Ireland. They haven't actually, they haven't achieved a language act as such yet, but it is an official minority language in the north. So once was the most widely spoken language, and to put it nicely, we had historical factors that led to the decline of its use and an increased use of English. Still spoken in the Gaeltacht regions. However, there has been an urban revival, and there's been a large increase in demand for Irish medium schools. And this is much welcomed by the Irish language community across the country. And also there's been an increased usage of Irish online, so it's become more normalised in our lives. The legislative developments that led us to where we are today, so 1973 we joined the EEC, so Irish was a treaty language at that stage. In 1999, which is following the peace agreement between the North and South, the British-Irish Agreement Act recognised Irish as part of the culture and wealth of the island of Ireland. And at that stage, First na Gaeilge was brought in as an all-island body responsible for Irish language affairs for the entire island of Ireland. 2003, we introduced an Official Languages Act. So this sets out the rules regarding the use of the Irish language in public administration. And with that, we had established the Office of the Language Commissioner, who will deal with any complaints where people feel that this act is not being upheld and that their constitutional right to use their language is not being met. In 2007, it became a working language of the EU. However, there's a partial derogation in place until 2021, by which we only translate key legislation. And this was due to the lack of skilled translators available to meet the demands, and also the lack of technology to support these translators. So the derogation is due to be lifted in 2021, and similarly to Maltese, technology will play a huge role, especially machine translation, in meeting these translation demands. 2012, we saw a Gaeltacht Act, and with this, it gave statutory effect to a 20-year strategy for the Irish language. And following that, due next year, we are drawing up a national digital strategy for the Irish language to see how we can digitally support the language and prevent digital extinction, which was a term mentioned earlier on. We are lucky in Ireland, we do have a department who oversees the Irish language affairs. So that's the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht. And we have a dedicated Minister of State whose responsibility for Gaeltacht affairs and therefore Irish language affairs. So we also had, as part of this white paper series, and Albert had mentioned 30 languages, and the official print version did have 30 languages, but then they extended to include the Welsh language, so they carried out a survey for Welsh. And so that showed, sorry about the graph, it doesn't show too clearly, but it's exactly what Albert had said. There are different categories for how well a language is supported, so going from excellent to weak or no support. MT is machine translation, this is along the left, text analysis, speech technology, so speech synthesis and speech recognition and so on, and then the language resources, which are the building blocks for all of these. We fall into the weak or no category, and you'll see Maltese is in there as well. In 2012, we were seen as having fragmentary support for Irish in terms of speech technology. So there's some work done in Trinity College Dublin on speech synthesis, and this is what caused the slight improvement at this stage. Since this report, we have made some headway in work on machine translation. So I'd imagine if the survey was done again, I would hope we would have moved into fragmentary for machine translation, but I wouldn't see that as a major achievement in terms of supporting a language. And one line from that survey, if you do have the opportunity to read the white paper, is the printing press resulted in the extinction of many minority and regional languages. And therefore the question is, will technology have the same impact on Irish or any other minority language around the world? And then again, here we come across this threat of digital extinction, which is one we should take very seriously. So in terms of existing resources, it's a little bit similar to what Albert had covered. We do have this work done on speech synthesis. We have a lot of very good electronic dictionaries, and they've been funded and overseen by First na Gaeilge, which is this all-island body for Irish language. We have centralised terminology database, and it's a Ciste Termiacht, which is the terminology committee that oversees the update of this database. Part of speech tagging, we have Corpora. Our Wikipedia is called on Wikipede, and we have, you were missing the stats for Irish earlier on, I'll fill in the gap. 48,000 articles on the Irish Wikipedia, and growing. And also Parser, and we have done some work on analysing the use of Irish in social media, which is something that Albert had alluded to is lacking a little bit in Maltese. Now, I'd like to point out, based on a couple of the last talks, we are really missing and we're really lacking in the area of technology and education. So computer-assisted language learning, call systems. And the problem here in terms of the perception of the languages, we have kids going into school to learn French, German, Spanish as a second language. They have apps, they have technology, they go into an Irish class and they're back to a textbook and paper. And so that is associating the language with being outdated and old-fashioned. And so already the perception coming up through this new generation is negative. So we really need to address that as a priority. We have two machine translation systems. One is one that we developed for the Department of the Gaeltacht. So we did it as a pilot project where we wanted to see the feasibility of using machine translation for the translators in-house in the Department of the Gaeltacht. And there's been another one developed, but it's a different domain, the IRA system. So what's the government doing right now? This is a good question. So the digital strategy that I mentioned will be launched next year. So the contributors come from various backgrounds of both speech and language technology in academia, with an oversight on the landscape, and most of these authors were also part of the MetaNet survey. So the 15 chapters in the digital strategy, and they're covering all these various topics. So starting from the basic linguistic resources, identifying what we have and our needs, and then moving on to the actual tools and applications that are required, and then the role that state and public will play in either using these tools or actually contributing to the development of them. And we'd also like to highlight some synergies within industry as well and where they can play a part. So I'm going to highlight machine translation here as this would be more appropriate, I think, to today's event. This is a screenshot, so if there's translators in the audience and they've used computer-aided translation technology, this is a screenshot of the user interface for SDL Trados. So it's a computer-aided translation tool. And at the bottom left-hand side, you have the uploaded Word file, and it's broken into segments, into paragraphs, so that the translator will deal with each paragraph one at a time. In the top section, you'll see a yellow box that says 71%. So the translation memory is remembering translations that have been done before, either by this individual or by the team. 71% indicates a fuzzy match, so it means that something similar has been done before, but it's not 100% matching. On the left-hand side, it will show the differences between what you're currently translating and what it has seen before. And what we did was we inserted a plugin, so the AT indicates the automated translation. So we had a plugin where our machine translation system also provided a suggestion for the translator. By integrating it into this workflow, it meant that it could seamlessly be integrated into the daily job of the translator. And the success of this particular project was based on this idea of sharing data. So when we went to the Department of the Gaeltacht, they asked could they tune a system that would work well with their data. So for example, Google Translate wouldn't do such a good job on the public administration style of data that they work on. We needed to tune a system on their particular data. So they actually had quite good data management practices within the department and handed over their previously translated data. We were able to tune the system to this, which helped to develop the system in the first place, led to greater productivity in terms of translations, reduced the translation cost, increased bilingual content available, and then they shared that data back in with us. So that helped to improve the machine translation system. So this virtuous cycle, this is how it worked on the local level within the government department and our pilot system. But this same idea applies broadly within the context of the European Commission, and the efforts that Mike is trying to do here in Malta is collect as much public administration data as possible across all departments and organisations so that we can improve machine translation for the languages at the EU level in terms of machine translation. And we also have the plan within in Ireland, so with the Department of the Gaeltacht, and this complements very well the work that's going on in Europe. Through the Official Languages Bill, they've decided that they're going to initiate a shared translation services. So currently, we have a very ad hoc approach in Irish government and departments in terms of translation. So a lot of the work is outsourced by each individual department. there's not a lot of reuse of translations, there's not a lot of sharing of data, and often the translation memory file is not requested back from the language service provider, which means that bodies will get stuck into this contract because the companies are being outpriced if they're the ones who are holding on to the previously translated data, and they're benefiting from that. So the idea would be to have a shared translation service that would be centralised, be overseen by the Department of the Gaeltacht. All requests for translation would come into one place, all data would be managed there, and there would be a more strategic approach to creating translation contracts. So Mike previously mentioned the ELRC, which is the European Language Resource Coordination. The efforts there are tried to, within each country in Europe, is to assign a national anchor point, both in public administration, both with respect to technology, and together that they would be able to find all the data, the previously translated data within public administration to help train the translation system in use at DGT, and that should be available then for use by all people working within Europe in public administration to help translate their own translation needs. Our involvement, of course, then is with the Department of the Gaeltacht and with Dublin City University technical experts. And a recent project arising from this, which we are part of, it's a pilot project, so there are 4 countries involved at the moment. It's Portugal, Spain, France and Ireland. ELRI is the European Language Resource Infrastructure. So we found that in the first couple of years, we're trying to get data from people through the ELRC. People were a bit resistant to send the data straight to Europe. They were a bit concerned about copyright issues. Maybe they weren't concerned about the quality of the data and so on. So what we've decided to do is create national relay stations. So they're locally administered, nationally administered. And through that, we would then encourage people to upload at the national level, and we would take care of the passing on to the European level where appropriate. One incentive for actually providing or donating data at this level is that the national relay station will actually generate a TMX file, if anyone knows what a TMX file is. So if you upload your bilingual data, you're going to get a TMX file back, which is very valuable for translation. So example of some of the sources where we got data within Ireland, we got it from the Language Commissioner's Office, we got from the Department of Justice, all our legislative acts. The universities have been very cooperative. Citizens Information website had a very large collection of very useful bilingual data. For Snegelga, that Irish language body that I spoke of, provided dictionaries and a very large monolingual Irish corpus, and also King's Inn, for example, the Law Society. These are just an example. We had many other sources. And we've also helped to advise people on how to manage their translations and the value of their translation resources. So we've suggested to add this line to a contract with any translation company. So where computer-aided translation tooling is used to produce translations, then in addition to the finished target translation, any and all translation memory or similar derived from the translation process should be returned to the department contracting for translation services as part of the final end delivery. So the advantages that we have found in terms of being a small country, so we meet up every 6 months with all these other countries and we all give some feedback on our progress. And being a small country, we found that we have relatively less public bodies and organisations to reach. Compared to, for example, Germany or Italy. We live in a bilingual society. We have a dedicated government department for the Irish Language Affairs. It really helps our efforts. We have that dedicated terminology committee which centralises all the terminologies. And it's easier to make those relevant connections when you're a smaller country, because you'll find somebody knows somebody else and it's easier to get through the network this way. Having the backing of the Department of Gaeltacht, so that support has really had a strong impact on our progress. But overall, it's the general disposition and the positive disposition towards supporting the Irish language. So we find that in some departments you might have an Irish language officer, and they're very enthusiastic about helping the Irish language in any way they can. So it doesn't really come down to a case of, is it my job, I don't have time for this, it's not part of my remit. They're very open to helping in the case of it being the Irish language that we're trying to help. And again, I would reiterate that the success of this work for us has been on the cooperation between the public national national anchor point and the technical national anchor point. It really has been. And I see this going forward quite successfully as well from here on in. So I'm going to move on to the role of social media because there's various reasons why the government will have decided that it's important to invest digitally into the Irish language. And one of those is actually noticing or taking notice of the use of Irish language online. So clearly there is a demand for digital support of the language that might not have been understood prior to this. So in 2015, the British Irish Council had a conference in Dublin, so the Indigenous Minority and Lesser Used Languages Conference, where the theme was promoting the languages through technology. And the common theme from everyone who came along and spoken of their experience with their language was that social media had actually played a very large role in the strengthening of their language. So normally this would be seen through connecting communities, because often you could have, in minority languages, you might have dispersed communities who were geographically not close, but through online mediums they were able to connect with each other. And so this is the case for all the Celtic languages and also for the Channel Island languages. And that leads me then to the use of Irish language on Twitter, which is one of my areas of research, and so this is why I'm going to hone in on this today. So it often comes as a surprise to a lot of people that there's been over 2.8 million tweets in Irish so far. And in that sense, we have definitely jumped on this social media bandwagon. And what's good about that is it sort of it challenges or debunks these myths, similar to our earlier speaker, in that people would have associated the Irish language with being old and outdated, yet when you see the activity online, you see a very different picture. Now, not everybody provides their geolocation through their tablet or their phone, but this is just indicative of numbers. But this is actually Irish tweets across the island of Ireland. So it's a very different map to what we would have seen earlier based on the census. And interesting in the north of Ireland as well as in the south of Ireland. But also Irish language conversations that occur across the world. So we have a very large diaspora, both in the US and in Australia, and I know there's a lot of Maltese in Australia also. But we're able to show that it's a global language and there is actually a demand for digitally supporting it in those terms. One way we do promote the use of the Irish language is through this hashtag Gaelga. Gaelga is the Irish word for Irish. And most people will try to tag their tweets. Now, if it's written in English or Irish, it doesn't matter. But if it's about the language, it's promoting the language and helping the language, or something of interest to Irish language speakers, then hashtag Gaelga is used. We've also seen in the last couple of years use of other types of hashtags at certain points of year to try to gel people together, to bring people together for a short period online and really see the enthusiasm for using the Irish language and connecting people. So Lánaman Socialta is actually a social media day, so that takes place on the 16th of March, the day before St. Patrick's Day. And Trasna means across the waves, and so the effort there is try to connect the diaspora around the world, and so that takes place over 4 days in January. And we can monitor our figures now to see these peaks and rises throughout the months of the year. So the peak for each year is Seachtain na Gaeilge, which is the Irish Language Week, but we can see that there's consistent use of Irish online, on Twitter at least. And also going back to Wikipedia, so feeding into the talk earlier on and how important Wikipedia is and creation of digital content, we are not lucky yet to have had the success that the Welsh have had with the Wikipedia development, but we are pushing towards it, and we've recently have appointed a project manager for Wiki Community in Ireland. Wiki Ireland, yeah. And also one of my students is helping out to provide classes as an undergraduate module to teach students how to edit Wikipedia, and then as part of the course they then have to hold a workshop and teach another 5 or 6 people how to learn it. And this is what we would see as crowdsourcing. Okay, so it's like the community and the crowd coming together to try to create this content. But another way that we can use crowdsource, and Albert had tapped into this a little bit earlier, is when you are an under-resourced language, so you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a lot of people available with the skills to do the work for you, you have to reach out to the community. And one way of doing this is to use crowdsourcing. So for example, a couple of years ago, we had the general election 2016. And online, some researchers at the Adapt Centre wanted to measure some sentiment analysis of the tweets leading up to the election. So you're able to do that and predict what the polls are saying. But it was only representing the English tweets around this because they didn't have the data to train the system to work on Irish tweets. So we decided to do some trial of just getting people, the general public, to translate tweets so that we could add to the data set and contribute to the study. We found it an interesting study because we asked people to provide a confidence level, knowing that there are various levels of proficiency in Irish from the public. But we did find that even though the tweet was actually a very high level of Irish, people might have only marked themselves as being 5 or 6. So there's something there in around people's confidence of using the language and the need to be perfect, which was an interesting outcome of it. And another way that it can be used is, so one of our colleagues in the Adapt Centre is doing work on brain health, and she's created a series of videos to help the public understand brain health in various topics. She had it translated into several languages, and all of those were done voluntarily, but she just didn't have access to Irish translators. So we put out a type of a bat call on Twitter, and through the network she managed to get 6 people to volunteer translations. So now we have these videos on brain health available for the Irish language community. So social media is a really important way to support the language, and it should be exploited in whatever way possible. So the conclusion then is we found that it's possible to influence government policy by analysing online language use. So we're able to even show language through code switching that the language is evolving over time, which makes just a normal language like any other language, that it's not archaic. That we can engage the public through pop signs, TEDx talks and so on. And then also it's just normalising the use of language in these various settings. So it's, again, making sure that people understand that it's not outdated and it's not archaic. And in general, when working with low resource languages, when you have limited resources, it's really important to try out some pilot project, because like our machine translation system, we're able to show through the pilot project that actually we can have some benefit and impact, that we can share knowledge across networks with the other minority groups. So we do connect well with the Celtic language technology groups, so in Wales and in Scotland, but also we're trying to branch out to connect with the other lesser resource languages in Europe. It's really important to seek both national and European support, and as Jill Evans will speak about later, we have some promising advances in this area from European support for multilingualism, which will really help our minority languages. Are fantastic. And we really need collective efforts towards this prevention of digital extinction. Gurmil Mahagiv, thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Lynn. I think with all the presentations we had, now we have a clearer way of how to move forward in this matter. And we'll be discussing the political nuts and bolts after the break of how to make this a reality. Talking about nuts, we have also carrot cake with cashew frosting. So we have a 10-minute coffee break once again, and we'll be back at about 12:10, 12:15 for the last session. Thank you.